Welcome back to another episode of the Vet Worthwhile podcast. I am James Yost, partner and wealth advisor at Signature FD, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Travis York, owner of 3-1 Advisors. Travis, how are you?
I'm doing great today, James. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Welcome back to another episode of the Vet Worthwhile podcast. As always, you got James Yost, you got Travis York. We are joined today with a very special guest. We have Dr. Brennen McKenzie, who is the Director of Veterinary Medicine over at Loyal, which is a biotech company based in San Francisco, focusing on FDA-approved life-extending pharmaceuticals in the veterinary space. They're recently in the news, which kind of spurred this interview, for getting a lot of traction on a specific drug with the FDA. So we'll get into that. We'll get into the details. Travis, how are you? Dr. McKenzie, how are you? Everybody good?
Doing great. Thanks for inviting me on.
Excellent. Travis, why don't you get us kicked off?
Yeah, well, hey, Brennan, it's great to have you on. We are incredibly excited to have you here. And as we were kind of talking about beforehand, this is kind of our first dive outside of the business realm in our Vet Worthwhile podcast. So hopefully you guys feel pretty excited to be our first dive into some scientific discussion. And probably you'll get to make James and I look a little bit foolish on this episode.
Oh, I don't think that's very likely. No, I'm very excited to talk about what we're doing at Loyal. I think the science of it's really interesting. And to be honest, I think there's some real implications for the business of veterinary medicine as well. So hopefully it'll be interesting for your listeners.
Well, we just appreciate you taking some time here over the holidays to sit down with us and catch up. Obviously, this is a new product. And so being able to share this with our listeners is pretty exciting. And I guess, just to kind of kick things off, a lot of our listeners are hospital owners, practicing veterinarians. And so maybe if you could just start to share a little bit with our listeners about your vision for how Loyal is going to impact practicing veterinary medicine and then maybe just the business of veterinary medicine.
Absolutely. So from a medical point of view, what we're trying to do is create medicines that we have approved through the FDA, meaning they've met sort of the highest bar out there for scientific research and evidence, and medicines that extend lifespan, but more importantly, extend what we call health span. Health span is the amount of time that you have in good health and good function. And we want dogs not just to live longer, but to be healthy longer. And we think the best way to approach that is to target some of the basic mechanisms of aging, because aging ultimately causes most of the diseases that we as practicing veterinarians see in adult animals. Apart from infectious diseases and trauma and things that happen in the young, most of what we have to deal with is involved in one way or another with the consequences of aging. So we think that by developing these kind of medications, we're really opening up a whole new area of preventative medicine. Instead of reacting to aging and playing what I call whack-a-mole, where we wait for each age-related disease to come up, kidney disease, cancer, heart disease, and treat it separately, we get ahead of it. We treat the underlying cause and we try to delay or prevent those diseases, and a whole new area of preventative medicine becomes available to us. From a business point of view, I think we can see in veterinary medicine that preventative medicine is good business. Obviously, parasite prevention, vaccines, and other infectious disease prevention therapies are a mainstay of the veterinary business. And I think having this new preventative medicine field available is going to have a real impact on the opportunities we have as veterinarians to expand our business and to ultimately take better care of our patients, which is what we all care most about.
That is fantastic. We are thrilled to hear more about these medications that you all are looking into and doing research on. Before we get too far into that, would love for you to share with our listeners just your background. I know you're still practicing, I believe, on the side in addition to your research. How did all that come to be, and then how did you end up in your specific role with Loyal?
Yeah, I've been a small animal general practitioner for about 20 years now. I practice in the Bay Area. I've been at the same practice for 19 years. And so I'm very much in the trenches as a clinician. And I'm also a little bit of a nerd. So I like the science side of things. I've been involved for many years with a group called the Evidence-Based Veterinary Medicine Association, and I was president of that group for a while. And about 5 years ago, I actually did a master's degree in veterinary epidemiology, because I'm really interested in how we take science and the basic knowledge we gain from it and translate that into practical, impactful real-world therapies. And that's kind of my area of interest. So I was working in practice, and I was approached by the former director of translational medicine at Loyal, Francis Chen, about maybe participating in one of Loyal's clinical studies. And that was right around the time the pandemic started. So for some practical reasons at our practice, we weren't able to participate in the trial. But I thought the work and the mission were really exciting and interesting. And so I kind of talked my way into a job. I kind of said, hey, what else, can I do with my clinical experience and my basic science background? How can I help? And so I came on initially as a consultant and then eventually as director of veterinary medicine. And what I bring to Loyal is a couple of things. I bring that real world clinical perspective. We are very much a vet-centered business. We want to make sure that our products are useful and increase the capacity of veterinarians to do their job and to grow their business. And so a lot of our researchers are fantastic scientists, but don't have that practical experience in the veterinary world. So I can bring that to what we're doing, make sure that we stay focused on the mission and the needs of veterinarians. I also see myself as a little bit of the conscience of the company because I'm interested in evidence-based medicine, and I have a real strong belief that we need to be rigorous about our science in veterinary medicine. I bring that perspective, and I'm constantly, doing what I can to make sure that we stay on mission, that we stay true to our ethos as a company, and that we develop things that are as scientifically legitimate and validated as we possibly can.
Sounds like a pretty big role and a lot of responsibility, especially kind of trying to juggle, quite frankly, some of the scientific or technological, I don't know exactly what the right word there is, advances in care, but then also just not push the limits to maybe some of, what I've heard people talk about in human medicine, where it's like we're just extending life to say that, hey, we went from 12 to 15 because 15 is better than 12, and those last 3 years are tough. It's a probably very unique role that we don't see in a lot of companies.
Absolutely. And of course, I have the advantage of working at a company that has a set of values that I really admire and impressed by. And our CEO, Celine Haliua, who started the company, has always said from the very beginning that what we're trying to do is improve the welfare of our patients as well as the well-being of their owners, because we know that having to deal with chronic disease in your dogs and losing your dogs ultimately is a burden on people as well. And no one wants to extend life without extending health. There would be no point in doing that. And so we're definitely focused on health span and on improving the quality of life. And I think the reality is that length of life will follow from that. Somewhere around 80 or 85% of dogs are euthanized, not dying naturally of their diseases, but dying because their diseases and their aging have made their quality of life unacceptable. And so if we can extend that quality of life, if we can delay or prevent those diseases, we'll inevitably extend the length of life, but we'll do so in a way that improves welfare and maintains health.
Very exciting. How long? I mean, what do you think is realistic, right? Like, you've got some scientific background in this. Like, what do you think is a reasonable expectation to extend that kind of health period, right? Do you see a 10% advance, or is it ultimately like we could double our healthy existence?
I mean, I think the long-term goal is to be as ambitious as we can. And if we want to put that in a little perspective, we have essentially doubled the human life expectancy from 30s and 40s for most of human history to a point at which many of us expect to live well into our 70s or 80s. And that hasn't been due to one single dramatic revolution. It's been due to the accumulation of a series of scientific steps forward that have improved our health and reduced particular causes of mortality. I think aging is different in that it's definitely looking at a much more global or holistic set of health problems. But I think ultimately, it's not going to be one magic pill that doubles lifespan. But I think the potential for that kind of change in life expectancy in our pets is out there. In the clinical studies that we're doing, again, we're focused on health span, but you need to have an objective outcome in a clinical trial. You need to be able to say, absolutely, we know that we've accomplished X. And for us, that X is roughly a 1-year extension in lifespan. And the reason we've picked that number is partly because we think that's a reasonable expectation, but also because we need to run these studies in a reasonable practical length of time. And so we're starting with older dogs and we're running 4 and 5 year studies. And we think over that amount of time, we might see as much as a year difference between the dogs who are taking our therapies and the dogs who are on placebo. Now, in the real world, if we start those therapies earlier and we use them for throughout the life of a dog, we could very well see a larger extension of lifespan and health span. And of course, it's not just going to be our products. It's going to be other medicines out there. It's going to be improvements in lifestyle and diet. So I think the long-term potential, if we start thinking of aging in a preventative medicine framework, is really unlimited. But I don't think that we should be necessarily expecting a single revolution that just flips the whole paradigm on its head, because I think that sets up some unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, I think it's great to kind of set the table like that, and just to help us understand exactly how the process works. But of the different products in processes that you're working on, which is the most that you're just most excited about? What have y'all seen the most progress with?
Gosh, it's so hard to pick. So we have 3 products that we're working on, and 2 of them are targeting the difference in life expectancy between large breed and small breed dogs. We all know that larger dogs have a shorter life, and that's not a natural thing. In fact, in the natural world, larger species tend to live longer than smaller species. It's a consequence of the intensive breeding for size. Just as we've created breathing problems in brachycephalic dogs like pugs and Boston Terriers, and we've created hip dysplasia and orthopedic problems in some larger breeds. We have made dogs larger, and some of the physiological mechanisms through which we've done that also make them age faster and have a shorter life expectancy. So one of the sets of products that we're working on, some drugs that try to address some of the physiologic consequences of that intensive artificial breeding and bring a little more balance so that the larger dogs can have more of a life expectancy that resembles that of smaller dogs. So that's exciting because that's a problem that we've created that maybe we can fix. However, we're also working on another product which is aimed at dogs of all breeds and sizes. And so, of course, that's exciting because that potentially is an even larger population of dogs that we could help improve welfare in. So it's hard to pick one. I think I'm very excited to see how all of these studies turn out.
That's very exciting. Now, I mean, maybe that just kind of tees us up, Brennen, to talk a little bit about just the FDA approval process. And I know a little bit of what you guys have been working on is something unique in the sense that the FDA has not actually prescribed or worked through approving any type of medication that extends lifespan. Is that correct in my reading? Did I kind of understand what you guys addressed there correctly? And then maybe can you share with our listeners, if that's correct, how you guys went about outlining a process to scientifically validate what your hypothesis was?
You're absolutely correct, because we've traditionally in medicine thought of individual diseases and of prevention or treatment for individual diseases. The regulatory structure is set up in that way. And the idea of preventing a whole group of diseases by targeting the underlying mechanisms of aging is a little outside the box. And so I think the regulatory agencies in general have been a little unsure of how to handle that approach. It doesn't fit neatly into the language of the legislation that built those agencies and directs their function. So our goal was to make that change in perspective or framework. And we're doing that with the regulatory agencies as well as with veterinarians. Thinking preventatively about aging is a pretty new thing. So the usual process you go through with the FDA is you have to prove that your product is safe, you have to prove you can manufacture it in an appropriate way, and you have to prove effectiveness. And effectiveness is usually proved through a clinical field trial. So you actually give some dogs your product and other dogs a placebo in normal owned pets over a period of time, and you measure whatever it is you're trying to accomplish to see that you've done what you want to do. There is a process called conditional approval. So if there is a problem for which we have no solutions, there are no medications to treat a serious medical problem, and if the studies needed to prove that you can accomplish that you can treat that problem are long and complicated, then the FDA allows for something called conditional approval. Clearly, aging is a problem we don't yet have effective treatments for, and studying aging obviously takes a long time and is complicated. So our products are eligible for this conditional approval process. You prove safety and you prove your manufacturing and all your other bits in exactly the same way that you do for any other drug. but you're allowed to demonstrate the effectiveness provisionally or conditionally through some preclinical research. And then potentially you can market that product for a limited period of time before you've finished the full clinical field trial. You're going to do it anyway, just like you would for any other product, but you can start marketing that product sooner so that people can take advantage of that new development as early as possible. And that's the path that we've approached for our products. So the recent announcement was about a product, again, that targets large breed dogs and tries to help undo some of the damage that intensive breeding has done to the life expectancy of large breed dogs. And the FDA agreed with the evidence that we presented that that was sufficient to prove a reasonable expectation of efficacy, meaning it's good enough to prove that the product works for the conditional approval process. We'll still go through the regular clinical trials that all products have to go through to get full approval. But in the meantime, potentially, if we finish all of the other paperwork and all of the other evidence, we could start marketing that product as early as 2026. And that's the process. And it's taken us about 4 years to develop and present the evidence and to work with the FDA. They've been very, very helpful, I think, in trying to take on this new idea. Their goal is to make sure that veterinarians have products that are safe and effective and to help benefit the health of companion animals. And so they've not by any means been an obstruction to us. They've been very helpful, but they want to make sure that we meet the standards that they've set. And so I think it's been a really good process. And that's a pretty big breakthrough in terms of the regulatory process. That hasn't happened in, as far as we know, in any other product, in human medicine, animal medicine, anywhere else.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. Thank you for sharing all that. I'm sure that very few people who listen to this podcast have taken anything through the FDA approval process. So I think that's going to be a great educational step there. Now let's talk a little bit about administration. So is this the type of thing when it comes to the treatment that would start as early as puppyhood, or is this something that they would start at 3 or 4 years? Like when does or full maturity, like how does the administration actually work for this drug?
So we have 2 products that we're developing, again, for large breed dogs. And obviously, we don't want to create small Great Danes. We're not trying to miniaturize these dogs. So we don't want to give them these products prior to full growth because that would change, their ultimate size. We believe, based on how these things work, that the greatest benefit will come from starting as early after full growth as possible. As I mentioned before, to test that in a clinical field trial would mean doing a 12-year study, and that's not practical. So we're going to start with dogs who are 10 years and older. And we think in the course of about 4 years of giving our products, we should be able to see at least a 1-year difference in life expectancy between the dogs who are on our product and the dogs getting placebo. Hopefully, if we're able to demonstrate that, and if the product gets approved, then over time, we may be able to do additional studies to show that the benefit is greater the earlier in life you start.
And so how exactly is it a like once a month shot? Is it a orally taken biweekly? Like what does the test look like?
For that problem, we have 2 products, one of which is going to be an injectable given about every 3 to 6 months. We're still working on the best formulation there. The other would be a daily oral tablet. And we're looking at the pros and cons and how we can develop different products that address the same problem so we can have as many tools available for the veterinarians to use as possible.
Very interesting. So like just kind of diving into that, obviously pill, injection, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but can you maybe just share with our listeners, is this something like, it doesn't sound like first pass of the product is going to be like, hey, we start this in a Great Dane puppy at 6 months old to slow the aging process. It may ultimately get there, but how do you kind of see this playing out in the real world? Is this something that you would start in a preventative structure, or would it be, started once there's indications of some sort of illness that this could help preserve the healthy cells?
It's absolutely intended as a preventative medicine. And so we think the earlier we start, the better. Again, we have to wait until they're fully grown. We don't want to start it in puppies because it might affect their growth, and we don't want to make these dogs littler than they would otherwise be. But somewhere around 1.5 to 2 years of age, when most of these large and giant breeds are fully grown, would be scientifically the optimal time to start. Because of the way we're doing the clinical studies, we're starting in dogs who are 10 years and older. If we're successful and these studies prove that the product is effective, it's going to be labeled only for dogs of that age and older. You have to test the product in the group of dogs you intend to treat. And so we're then going to have to do additional research to hopefully try to start using those products earlier and earlier in life, because we think ultimately the benefit will be greater the earlier we start.
That's interesting too. And another thing, and I don't know, maybe this is my naivete shining through. I was just curious as to how they're going to be able to tell the exact age of a dog that comes in. You know, if the owner adopted, for example, and didn't have didn't buy from a breeder, it wasn't there for when the puppy was born. Are they able to kind of pinpoint that within a certain number of months, or how good is the proximity there?
Sure. So from a practical point of view, when you're using a product like this clinically, it's not that critical exactly how old the dog is. The only thing you're really looking for will be, in the long term, that they're at least fully grown. And in the short term, if it's aimed at dogs 10 years and older, I think a reasonable degree of confidence is really all you need. From the point of view of our clinical trials, we do actually have to have some documentation of age, and that's been one of the challenges because we want to open this up to as many people as possible. We're doing our studies almost exclusively in general practice environments because we want the dogs who come in to be representative of normal pet dogs, so that the data that comes out of the study is representative of the real world. And it is a challenge because a lot of dogs are rescued. But fortunately, we're finding that a lot of dogs either have birth records as purebreds, or even if they're rescue dogs, they've been rescued as puppies. And so if we can get within about a year of that age, that's looking like that's going to be sufficient for our clinical studies.
Interesting. It's is that kind of standard that there is some flexibility when you've like researched other studies, or is the FDA offering a little bit more flexibility on the age of the pets in this study because it's maybe not quite as like critical?
I don't think it's a question that's really come up before, because generally speaking, the precise age of a dog isn't usually considered that important if you're trying to focus on a specific disease. I think the reason it comes up in our study is because we're doing something new, which is we're talking about aging specifically. And so we need to know how long these dogs live and what age they are when they pass away, because that's what we're trying to extend, right? We want them to live longer, so we need to know how long they've been alive. And I think that's a new problem. And it's just one example of a lot of the challenges that we have to identify and solve when we're working in a new area of science. And I think that the FDA is working with us to make sure that we are able to solve those challenges in ways that preserve, the rigor of the scientific evidence.
Interesting. Now, kind of talking, okay, I was just going to follow up by talking about the population set. Are you then, I'm assuming the population that's in the studies right now are confirmed healthy through their medical records, right? You're not accepting anybody into the population set that has a terminal illness, or are we including them in this initial study to kind of see the impacts of the drug on those dogs that may have terminal illness and the ability to keep generating healthy cells?
So we're starting our studies in older dogs for the practical reason that we need to be able to identify that we've actually successfully extended their life in a reasonable length of time. And if we started in young dogs, we'd be running 10 and 15-year studies, which is just not feasible. So we expect that a lot of the dogs in our populations, in our studies, will have some health problems related to age. You don't get a population of 7-year-old dogs in large breeds, or 10-year-old dogs in other dog breeds that don't have at least some age-related disease. Obviously, we aren't going to accept dogs in the studies that we don't think are going to live for more than a few months, because of course we probably are past the point where we can benefit those dogs. But we are going to try to make this as realistic and real world a study as possible, so that we know when we get to actually using the product in clinics that it's going to work the same way that it did in the study. So we expect that we will see some benefit even in dogs that have some pre-existing health problems, as long as we're careful that those are not such severe problems that nothing is going to be beneficial for those dogs.
So let's get into the real world application too a little bit more. So Travis and I both have pets. I have 2 dogs, 3 cats. I'm in my vet probably weekly, unfortunately. So shout out to Sugar Hill Animal Hospital. So for real world application, do you see this as being similar to like a heartworm preventative, where you're going in and it's scheduled every 6 months or 3 months, whatever, as part of the normal preventative maintenance? And then second question is, how does this actually get into the hands of veterinarians around the country? Like, what does that adoption look like? What's the appetite for something like this from your peers that you've spoken to?
I think there's tremendous interest among both veterinarians and dog owners in more and better tools to prevent the negative health consequences of aging. I think you can look just to the supplement market or to some of the diets out there that are marketed with the idea that they might help with aging to see how popular products like that are. And unfortunately, most of the things currently available none of them have been through the FDA approval process, so none of them have that level of scientific evidence that we'd like ideally to have. So I absolutely think people are interested in more and better tools for preventative healthcare. And I think aging, again, is something that we've imagined as this sort of inevitable, mysterious fact of the universe, when really aging is just biology. And the consequences of aging, the diseases that occur as we get older and as our pets get older, are just predictable consequences to the underlying biology. And we can understand that. And once we understand it, we can develop strategies to change that and to improve health as they get older. So I absolutely see in the long run our products and any of these therapies that are coming out to target aging as becoming a routine part of preventative healthcare. You exercise, you eat a healthy diet, you take medications to prevent specific diseases. We've got a lot of people taking statins to try to prevent heart attacks and strokes. And maybe someday you're also regularly going in to have your every 6-month, aging shot, or you're taking your daily aging pill. I mean, I think that very much would be the model of something like this, just an ordinary part of normal health maintenance.
I love it. And what do you see as being the parallel in human medicine? Because I've seen and been a part of and have done a lot of research myself on longevity within the human health span, similar to what you're talking about. Is there any overlap in the science, or is it completely different?
Well, one nice thing about what we're doing is that for once, the veterinary field gets to be ahead a little bit, I think, of human medicine. And some of that is just practical. Dogs are actually a surprisingly good model of aging in humans for a couple of reasons. One, they live with us, so they share our environments and a lot of the exposures that might affect our health as we age. Two, because we love them, and so we care about their aging and their health, and that provides an opportunity for us to do something to benefit them. But also biologically, aging is a pretty core fundamental set of processes in the biology of all species, but especially within groups like mammals, for example. And it turns out that the mechanisms are remarkably similar across species that may seem very different. And so the kinds of diseases our dogs get are very similar. The general trajectory of aging is very similar to humans, except it's faster, which makes them a little bit easier to study and also creates more of an urgency to try to do something about aging in dogs. So I do think that what we're doing will have implications for longevity research in the human field. I'm a vet. I care about the dogs, and I'm going to stick with my lane and work on animal health. But I think we aren't naive to imagine that this doesn't have greater implications and that people won't be interested in this from that point of view if we are able to prove success.
I'm excited. And James, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I was like bouncing around in my head it's like, hey, if this works in dogs, is this applicable in humans? And it's really interesting to think about the fact that we're kind of starting. It's kind of scary, but it's interesting to think about the fact that we're starting to dive into, what are preventative things that we can do, not just to prevent disease, but actually just prevent the aging process. And I may use that as kind of a chance to dive in a little bit to, our podcast generally tends to focus on the business side of things, Brennen. So as you're kind of thinking about the loyal products and how they fit into veterinary hospitals and the care of pets, how do you see this impacting kind of the business side of things, right? Like profit and loss statements and cost of care and expectations placed on veterinarians to slow the aging process of our pets?
One of the things that, again, our CEO, Celine, has been very focused on is making sure that our products have the biggest impact we can have. And that, for one thing, means that we need to make them accessible to as many people as possible. So we're very much looking at the costs of development and production and how we can translate that into something that is affordable and readily accessible. So I think this is something that is probably going to be widely available in general practices. That's a part of our commitment. And so if we're successful at opening up this whole new area of preventative medicine, I think that opens up a whole new set of business opportunities for veterinarians. Obviously, as I mentioned, vaccines, parasite prevention are a big part of the veterinary business now. We know that there is a demand for better tools to prevent age-related diseases in our pets, and I think that that's gonna be something that provides opportunity for veterinary practices. I think also any new area that taps into that kind of demand and that kind of interest in having new tools and new techniques available is going to be favorable to those practices that are progressive and proactive and that get involved in this early. I think if people in veterinary practice are able to talk to their clients about thinking about aging in this preventative way and lay the groundwork for understanding aging differently, for not just reacting to it, but trying to get ahead of it, I think those practices are going to be particularly successful when these tools start to come on the market.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, this has been fantastic, incredibly good information, super exciting stuff coming from you guys. Before Travis, he's going to wrap it up and give us a final question here, but was just curious for our listeners. I mean, if they're trying to track this and track the development and follow you guys, what's the best way for them to stay educated and be able to keep up with the developments going on at Loyal?
Probably at this point, our website is the best resource. We try to keep that up to date on the science. We make sure all of our publications are available there, as well as updates like the recent FDA approval. So loyalfordogs.com is our website, and we have opportunities for people to sign up there if they're interested sometimes in participating in our clinical studies, both veterinarians and dog owners, and just to keep up on the news with what we're doing.
Very exciting. Thank you again for coming on, Brennan. And now you've gotten all the easy questions. We always finish it with a really kind of tough, like two-pronged question for you.
Okay, bring it on.
The first, there's a little sign that I've seen hung over the toilet, the toilet that says everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change the toilet paper. So we ask all of our guests if they make sure and change the toilet paper when they hit that empty roll, or if they've ever kind of just maybe ducked out of the bathroom with the empty toilet paper roll for the next person.
Well, I will say that I do change the toilet paper whenever I run to the end. My wife will tell you that I put it on in the wrong direction, and we've not, after 27 years of marriage, agreed on what direction we should put it back on, but I definitely do my part there.
So are you an over or an under?
Oh, I'm an over, definitely. Clearly.
Yeah, I'm an over as well. I thought it's the only way to go, I think. But
now kind of the real question here though is a lot of our listeners are focused on opportunities and ways to change the world. You guys are obviously kind of at the forefront of trying to do that and make a massive difference. So what is your advice for our listeners, or a younger veterinarian or a colleague of yourself that wants to change the world, whether it be inside of veterinary medicine or out?
I think there are so many opportunities. Veterinary medicine is such an amazing field because I have been a clinician, I have been a writer, I have been a teacher, I have participated in research as a veterinarian. Now I'm involved in research from the industry side. It's a profession with an incredible variety of opportunities. And so what I tell people entering the profession is don't limit yourself, don't put yourself in a box, don't say, well, I'm a GP or I'm a dermatologist and I can only do this and I can't do that. Follow your passion, follow what you're interested in. If you see something that needs doing and nobody's doing it, build it yourself, create it yourself. There are so many opportunities, and I think people just need to appreciate that and take advantage of that.
Great advice.
Love it. Dr. McKenzie, it's been great having you on from Loyal. This has been the Vet Worthwhile podcast. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks again for tuning in to the Vet Worthwhile podcast. You can find us online at signaturefd.com/signatureveterinary. And then our ask would be, if you found this episode valuable, just think of one friend or colleague that you think would enjoy the content, and just please share. So thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Travis York is the owner of 3-in-1 Vet Advisors and a partner of Signature FD. 3-in-1 Vet Advisors is a veterinary consulting and strategic planning firm of which Signature FD has no involvement or ownership. James Yost is a partner and wealth advisor at Signature FD. Signature FD is an investment advisor registered with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. 3-in-1 Vet Advisors and Signature FD are not affiliated. Mr. York provides all non-investment advisory services through 3-in-1 Vet Advisors. The opinions of the guests and the contents of this podcast are intended to be educational only and should not be relied upon as investment, tax, business, or planning advice. You should consult with a professional advisor prior to taking any course of action that may impact you or your business.